The city of New York never truly slept. Its nights pulsed with a restless heartbeat. Neon lights blinking against high-rise glass taxis streaming like molten gold through Fifth Avenue, voices rising and falling in a dozen different languages. Somewhere above this storm of ambition and noise, the air was silent enough to hear the hum of an expensive clock on the 39th floor of White Enterprises headquarters. Nova Hernandez stood there clutching a leather folder to her chest, her palms slightly damp. She had prepared for this day for years, endless nights buried in case studies, countless presentations perfected until dawn, a degree earned with sweat sacrifice and stubborn faith. And now, finally, she was standing in front of the interview panel of one of the most powerful corporations in the country. Or so she thought. Her lips parted when the sharp, immaculately dressed woman at the long mahogany table smiled politely but indifferently. "Miss Hernandez," the woman said crisply, "your application has been reviewed. You are the final candidate for the position." Nova's heart leapt. Assistant to the CEO. Her chance to step into the very center of power where billion-dollar decisions were made over morning coffee. She straightened her shoulders, her honey-brown skin glowing under the ceiling lights, her curls pinned neatly back to present the picture of competence. But the following words shattered her composure. "The position," the woman continued, "is not merely administrative. You will be working as Mr. White's personal caretaker." The word caretaker struck her like a slap. "I'm sorry." Nova blinked, trying to process. "There must be some mistake. I applied for the executive assistant role. The listing said—" "The listing was accurate," the woman interrupted smoothly, but her voice softened almost with pity. "Executive assistant, yes. But to Mr. Noah White himself, and given his particular condition, this role extends beyond boardroom schedules. It requires managing his private needs, routines, and day-to-day care. In essence, Miss Hernandez, you would be his personal caretaker." Nova's pulse quickened. Caretaker. For a CEO. For that Noah White, the elusive billionaire whose name was carved across skyscrapers, whose reputation for ruthlessness made Wall Street executives tremble. Her jaw tightened. "I didn't spend years proving myself just to become someone's nanny." She forced a laugh, low and incredulous. "With all due respect, I graduated at the top of my class at Columbia. I've presented research that's been cited internationally. I'm not qualified to be anyone's babysitter, let alone—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence with a bitter older man. The woman's smile widened knowingly. $50,000 a month, Miss Hernandez. Room and board included benefits beyond what most executives see in years. The number hung in the air like forbidden fruit. $50,000. Nova's breath hitched. She thought of her grandfather, lying in that narrow bed in their small Bronx apartment, prescriptions stacked like fragile towers on the nightstand, medical bills heavier than bricks. She thought of how often she had promised him she would make it, that her brilliance would lift them both from the shadows of struggle. Her pride whispered no, but survival whispered louder. Before she could reply, the heavy double doors behind them swung open. A hush fell across the room, as if gravity itself had shifted. Noah White entered. He was taller than she expected, his frame broad shoulders carved with authority. His suit was obsidian, tailored to perfection, though the gleam of the wheelchair beneath him was what drew every eye. He moved with an air that was both commanding and aloof, as though the chair was merely another extension of his empire, not a limitation. His face was sculpted in sharp lines, pale as marble against the black of his attire. Eyes a piercing storm gray that seemed to measure and dismiss in the same glance. Noah White. Billionaire. Titan. Broken man, or so the whispers said. Is this the candidate? His voice was smooth, yet clipped each syllable precise. The woman bowed her head slightly. "Yes, Mr. White. Miss Nova Hernandez." Noah's gaze turned toward her, and for one endless heartbeat, Nova felt stripped bare every strength, every insecurity, every lie she had ever told herself laid open under that storm-gray scrutiny. "Coffee," he said flatly. Nova blinked. "Excuse me?" Noah replied that you can at least do that, his tone laced with cold amusement. "Please make me a cup of coffee. If it's acceptable, you stay. If not, get out." Anger flared in Nova's chest. Was this a test or an insult? She wanted to snap back to remind him she was a scholar, not a servant, but her grandfather's face floated before her eyes, fragile and trusting. She swallowed her pride and nodded. "Fine. Coffee it is." The room seemed to watch with bated breath as she moved to the corner where a sleek Italian espresso machine gleamed like a weapon. Nova inhaled slowly, summoning everything she had ever learned from long nights waitressing in Brooklyn cafes where she balanced textbooks against trays of lattes. 2.5 millimeter grind size, she murmured under her breath. 92 degrees Celsius extraction in 23 seconds. Her hands moved with practiced precision, measuring grinding tamping. The hiss of steam curled around her like smoke from a battlefield. When she placed the cup before him, Noah lifted it, his expression unreadable. He took one sip, then another. The silence was suffocating. Finally, he set the cup down, his storm-gray eyes flickering with something sharp, almost surprised. "You adjusted the temperature lower than standard," he said slowly. Why? Nova lifted her chin. "Because you're on medication for gastritis. Too hot, and it would aggravate your stomach. I thought you might appreciate that." For the first time, Noah's gaze lingered on her a fraction longer. Not quite approval, not yet, but something like curiosity. The woman at the table smiled faintly. "So," Mr. White Noah turned his chair slightly, dismissing them all with a wave. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of finality. "She stays." Nova exhaled shakily, her knees almost buckling. But in that moment of victory, as relief washed through her, Noah's following words cut the air like a blade. "Understand this, Miss Hernandez," he said, his voice colder than steel. "You are not here because you're exceptional. You are here because everyone else failed. You are not my equal. You are a necessity I tolerate. Cross the line, and $50,000 will not save you. Do we understand each other?" Nova forced herself to meet his eyes, her pride warring with fear. "Perfectly, Mr. White." But inside, as she clenched her folder tighter, a spark ignited a promise to herself. "One day, Noah White, you'll see me as more than a caretaker. You'll see me as the woman who refused to bow." And with that vow whispering inside her, the game between them truly began. The first morning in the White Enterprises penthouse felt less like waking up and more like trespassing into a forbidden cathedral. Nova Hernandez sat at the edge of the immaculate guest room bed, her back straight, palms pressed into her knees, as if she were about to attend a trial rather than begin employment. The room seemed designed to unnerve marble floors polished until they reflected her silhouette curtains heavy as armor, a chandelier of black crystal dangling like a storm cloud above. Everything whispered of wealth, but not comfort. This was not a home. This was an empire wearing the mask of an apartment. Nova drew a deep breath, muttering, "50,000 a month, Nova. Don't forget why you're here." A knock came sharp and authoritative. Before she could answer, the door swung open to reveal a man in his late 50s. His suit was immaculate, though his posture carried a loyalty almost military in its stiffness. I am Jonathan Hale. He introduced himself, voice low, but clipped Mr. White's chief of staff. You will report to me regarding all schedules, but for domestic matters, he expects direct attention, which means you. Nova rose, clutching the hem of her blouse. Understood. Hale studied her for a long moment, his eyes not unkind, but weighed with a caution she couldn't yet decipher. He is a difficult man, Miss Hernandez. I suggest you tread carefully. I don't scare easily. A faint shadow of a smile ghosted across his lips. That is what the last 5 assistants said. Nova's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin. Then I'll be the first to prove him wrong. The first task seemed deceptively simple: breakfast. Noah White was already seated at the head of the dining table, his wheelchair positioned like a throne between walls of glass that overlooked the glittering city. The morning sun framed him like a reluctant halo, though his expression was anything but saintly. Coffee, he said, without glancing at her. The demand was identical to their first meeting, a test perhaps, or a reminder that nothing she had done yesterday mattered. Nova steadied her breathing, poured the precise grind she had memorized, and placed the cup before him with careful hands. Noah lifted it, inhaled, sipped, then set it down. His face remained unreadable. Toast, he said. She frowned. Toast. Is the word unfamiliar? His gaze lifted, storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with disarming sharpness. Bread. Heat. Transformation. I assume even you can manage that. Nova's teeth pressed together, but she moved toward the polished chrome toaster at the counter. She could hear him typing on his tablet, every keystroke echoing like a judgment. When she placed the golden slices before him, he did not touch them. He looked at her, one brow arching. No butter. Her patience cracked. You didn't say butter. I didn't need to specify. His tone was ice, yet there was something almost amused lurking in its depths. Competence requires anticipation, Miss Hernandez, not obedience. Nova inhaled through her nose, resisting the urge to throw the butter knife across the room. Instead, she spread it across the toast with slow, deliberate care, then set the plate down again. This time he bit into it. A pause. Another bite. Still no expression. She crossed her arms. Do I pass your little culinary trial, or shall I prepare a 3-course brunch to prove I can follow instructions? The faintest twitch touched his lips. Not quite a smile, but close. Sarcasm. Dangerous strategy for someone on probation. Maybe Nova replied evenly, but honesty tends to be more efficient than flattery. His eyes lingered on her longer before he returned to his tablet. You'll survive another day. It was not praise, but somehow it felt like one. Days blurred into weeks. Nova's new reality became a series of impossible demands each morning, a battlefield each night, an uneasy truce. Noah was relentless. His schedule shifted by the hour, his standards higher than gravity, his scrutiny sharper than knives. She learned quickly that his coldness was not random. It was calculated as a shield forged of steel and silence. He demanded precision in everything: the exact temperature of his coffee, the precise angle of his wheelchair, the order in which documents were handed to him. But beneath the frost, Nova noticed patterns. The way his hands sometimes trembled before he gripped the armrest tighter. The faint wince he tried to mask when adjusting his legs. There was a shadow in his eyes whenever his gaze fell too long on the city skyline. He was not merely difficult, he was wounded. And wounds, Nova knew, often wore the mask of arrogance. One evening, after a fierce day shadowing him through meetings, Nova collapsed onto the couch in the guest suite. She closed her eyes, exhaustion weighing her limbs like lead. She hadn't realized Noah had entered until his voice cut through the silence. You lasted longer than I expected. Her eyes snapped open. He was in the doorway, his wheelchair framed by the dim golden glow of the hall lights. His tie hung loose, his expression unreadable. Nova sat up quickly. "I didn't hear you. That's because you were too busy pretending the world doesn't exist." His words carried the sting of mockery, but his gaze was oddly intent, as though searching for cracks in her armor. She bit back a retort. "Is there something you need?" Silence stretched. Then unexpectedly he said, "Why didn't you quit?" The question startled her. "Excuse me." "Others did. After a week, 2 at most. Yet you remain." "Why?" Her lips parted, but words didn't come immediately. She thought of her grandfather, unpaid bills, and promises she could not afford to break. But she also thought of her pride, of the spark inside her that refused to let him win. Finally, she met his storm-gray eyes. "Because I don't run from difficult men." Something flickered across Noah's face for the first time, something she couldn't quite name. Surprise, admiration, or perhaps recognition. He wheeled closer, the sound of the chair's motor, a low hum in the silence. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough for her to notice the faint scent of cedar and leather that clung to him. "Careful, Miss Hernandez," he said softly, almost like a warning. "You might mistake stubbornness for courage. And in my world, the difference can be fatal." Nova's pulse quickened, but she refused to look away. "Or maybe, Mr. White, it's the only thing keeping me from being swallowed whole." The air between them tightened, charged with something neither wanted to acknowledge. For a heartbeat, the world outside the city lights, the noise, the empire faded, leaving only 2 people locked in a silent duel. And then, just as suddenly, Noah turned his chair and left without another word. That night, Nova lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind a storm. She had entered this mansion as an employee, nothing more. But with each clash, each glance, each battle of words, she felt the line blur. He was her employer, her challenge, her tormentor, but he was also human. A man carved from ice, yes, but with fractures that revealed fire beneath. And against her better judgment, she found herself drawn to the flame. The invitation arrived not as an envelope, but as a command. Jonathan Hale appeared at Nova's door that morning, carrying a folder embossed with the golden crest of the Metropolitan Club. His expression was grave, his voice low as though announcing a verdict. "Mr. White requires your presence this evening," Hale said, placing the folder into her hands. Nova frowned, sliding the free annual White Enterprises charity gala invitation. An elegant and daunting swirl of embossed lettering gleamed against deep navy paper. "I don't understand," she murmured. "This isn't my kind of event." "It is now," Hale replied. "You are to accompany Mr. White. Consider it part of your duties." Her stomach nodded. She had imagined many challenges in this job, endless schedules, impossible standards, verbal duels that left her trembling with rage. But a gala, an arena of silk gowns, crystal chandeliers and whispered judgments, that was a battlefield she had never trained for. Hours later, the city was ablaze in the night. The Metropolitan Club loomed at the corner of Fifth Avenue, its marble columns bathed in golden light. Black cars glided to a halt before the grand entrance, spilling out. Senators, heiresses, tech moguls, each draped in couture. Paparazzi bulbs flared like stars exploding, and laughter echoed against stone. Nova stepped onto the curb, breath caught in her throat. Her gown, a sleek black silk chosen hastily by Eleanor White's assistant, clung to her curves with understated elegance. Yet she felt out of place, a chess piece dropped on the wrong board. Then Noah appeared beside her. He emerged from the limousine with practiced grace, his wheelchair gleaming like polished obsidian. his suit a midnight shade that matched the cold fire in his eyes. The crowd seemed to pause, as if the air bent around him. For a moment, Nova forgot her unease. He was beautiful in his severity, like a sculpture come to life, carved of marble and storm. His gaze flicked to her, and something unreadable passed across his features. Approval. Amusement. He offered no hint. Only, stay close. This world eats the careless alive. Inside the ballroom shimmered with decadence. Chandeliers scattered light across a sea of diamonds and champagne. A string quartet played something delicate, yet the hum of whispered alliances and veiled rivalries drowned even the violins. Nova walked half a step behind Noah as he maneuvered through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. She felt their gaze sweep over her skin curls and presence beside him, an unspoken chorus of questions and judgments. Who is she? Not one of us. Caretaker, perhaps. The words were not spoken aloud, but Nova heard them nonetheless, pressed into the edges of every smile. Eleanor White stood at the heart of the ballroom, regal, in a silver silk gown. She greeted guests with a smile as sharp as a blade, commanding respect without ever raising her voice. When her gaze landed on Nova, it lingered for half a second too long. Then, with practiced ease, she returned to the senator at her elbow, dismissing Nova as if she were a shadow. Nova's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin. If they wanted to see her as invisible, she would make them choke on her presence instead. The speeches began. Noah was summoned to the dais and introduced as the visionary who had steered White enterprises through storms no other company could weather. Applause thundered, cameras flashed, glasses clinked in synchronized admiration. Nova stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as he spoke. His voice was cold-clipped, commanding the same tone he used in the boardroom. Yet beneath it, she sensed something else, a man straining against chains no one else could see. Every word is precise, and every movement is calculated to deny weakness. And for a moment, she saw not the billionaire, but the man who had once stood taller, freer, before a cruel twist of fate dragged him into steel and wheels. Her chest ached unexpectedly. When his speech ended, applause roared again. Noah's gaze swept the crowd, indifferent until it snagged on her. Storm-gray eyes held hers for an instant too long, as if the entire room had dissolved into silence. Her breath caught. Then just as quickly he looked away. Later, as servers glided with trays of champagne, Nova found herself cornered near the gallery of portraits. A woman in an emerald gown, blonde, porcelain-skinned lips curved like a dagger, approached with a smile, too polished to be sincere. Nova Hernandez. Her voice dripped honey, but her eyes glinted like glass. I'm Sophia Monroe. The name struck like a bell. Nova had heard it whispered by staff, the woman who once held Noah's heart. Sophia's smile widened at Nova's silence. It's brave of you, really, to walk into this world. Heroic, or naive. Her gaze swept Nova's gown, posture, and presence beside Noah. You do realize what they're saying about you, don't you? Nova's throat tightened, but she forced calm. People will always talk. It rarely makes them right. Sophia laughed softly, tilting her champagne glass. Admirable confidence. But let me offer you advice, woman to woman. Noah White is not a man you tame. He is a man you survive if you're clever. If you're not... She let the silence hang like a guillotine. Before Nova could reply, a voice cut through. Enough, Sophia. Noah's chair rolled forward, his presence slicing through the air like a blade. His gaze was ice-fixed on the woman before them. You're overstepping. Sophia's lips curved into something sharper. Am I? Or am I simply telling her the truth? You won't. Their eyes clashed, history simmering beneath the surface. For a moment, Nova felt like an intruder at the center of an old war. Then Noah turned to her, his voice low but firm. "Stay with me." And just like that, the conversation ended. Sophia drifted away, her perfume lingering like smoke after fire. Nova's heart pounded as she followed Noah back into the throng. His words echoed in her mind. Not an order this time, but something else, a shield. Stay with me. The night stretched on. Deals were whispered, glasses emptied, and beneath the grandeur of chandeliers, Nova felt the weight of invisible battles pressing down. But as she moved beside Noah, she realized something startling. She was no longer afraid. The stares, the whispers, the judgments, they burned. Yes. But they did not consume her, because each time his gaze brushed hers, even for the briefest instant, it anchored her. And though he remained cold, distant, untouchable, she began to suspect that a crack was forming beneath the marble. A crack shaped like her. When they returned to the limousine, the city was quiet, rain misting against the windows. Nova leaned against the leather seat, exhausted, but strangely exhilarated. Noah sat across from her, expression unreadable. The silence between them stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally she spoke. "You knew she would corner me, didn't you?" His eyes flicked to hers. "Sophia corners everyone." "That's not what I asked." A pause. Then quietly, "Yes." Nova stared. "And you let it happen. I wanted to see how you'd handle it." His tone was calm, but his gaze sharpened. "You surprised me." Her heart stuttered. "In a good way." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, as the limousine slid through the rain-slick streets, he answered in a voice softer than she'd ever heard. "The best way." Nova turned to the window, her reflection shimmering against the glass. But she could not hide the small, dangerous smile tugging at her lips, because for the first time since entering Noah White's world, she realized something terrifying. She was no longer here just for survival. She wanted to win. The rain had not ceased by the next morning. It fell against the tall glass walls of the penthouse like an unending confession, drumming softly into every corner of the silence. Nova crept through the kitchen, setting out breakfast with practiced precision. Coffee-brewed eggs folded into silk toast, cut into perfect halves. She had long since learned his preferences, and though he rarely gave praise, she had discovered a sure steadiness in the ritual. But Noah White did not appear. Minutes passed. Then an hour. When Jonathan Hale entered, his brow faintly furrowed. Nova felt the tension prickle along her skin. "Where is he?" she asked softly. Hale hesitated. His loyalty to Noah was ironclad, but something in his gaze betrayed unease. "He hasn't left his quarters. He dismissed the staff and no meetings are scheduled today." Nova frowned. "Is he unwell?" "Mr. White does not confide in anyone," Hale replied carefully. Then, after a pause, he added, "But he has not eaten. That is unusual." Nova felt the weight of the silence pressing harder now. Something in her chest pulled her toward the closed door at the end of the corridor. She stood before it moments later, her knuckles raised before she had even decided to knock. The sound echoed once, twice. No reply. She drew a deep breath and pushed the door open. The room was dim, curtains drawn, air heavy with the faint scent of whiskey. Noah sat near the window, his chair turned toward the rain-slick skyline. His jacket lay discarded across the floor, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. A glass tilted idly in his hand, amber liquid glinting with each slight shift. He did not turn as she entered. "I told Hale, no interruptions," he said flatly. His voice was deeper, rougher threads of exhaustion woven through steel. Nova stepped closer, ignoring the warning in his tone. "You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. You need your medication." His laugh was low, humorless. You presume to dictate my life now. I presume to care, she said quietly. At that, he finally turned. His storm-gray eyes were shadow-rimmed with something rawer than arrogance. For a moment, Nova saw not the untouchable billionaire, but a man unraveling at the seams. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked suddenly. The question startled her. "I see." She faltered, words catching in her throat. "I know a man who built an empire." "Lies." His voice cut sharply. "You see the chair, the broken body, the pity." "No." Her reply was firm, startling even herself. "I see someone who refuses to surrender, even when everything tries to make him." The silence that followed was taut, fragile as glass. Slowly, Noah set the glass aside. His gaze locked onto hers, unrelenting. "You're wrong, Nova. I did surrender. That night on the highway when steel crushed bone and fire kissed skin, I gave up. I have been giving up every day since." Her chest tightened. She wanted to reach for him to bridge the distance with touch, but she remained still, knowing he might recoil from pity more than pain. Instead, she said softly, "Then why do you still fight?" He blinked. "Because you could have disappeared." She continued, her voice steady. "You could have vanished into the shadows of your wealth. But you didn't. You're here daily facing boardrooms, whispers, and yourself. That isn't surrender, Noah. That's survival. And it's more than most men could do." The words hung between them, delicate as threads of silk. Something in his expression cracked for the first time. Not the cold, not the arrogance, but the weary shell that caged his truth. "Survival," he echoed, almost tasting the word. Nova stepped closer, her hands trembling at her sides. "You don't have to do it alone." His eyes darkened, unreadable, a storm is gathering. And then, almost against his own will, he whispered, "Leave me, Nova. Before you believe, I am something worth saving." Her breath caught. "What if I already do?" The silence broke like thunder. Noah's chair shifted abruptly, turning away. His voice was harsh again, walls slamming back into place. "Go. Now." Nova stood frozen, torn between obedience and defiance. But the fragility she had glimpsed in him, the fracture, stirred something dangerous in her heart. At last she turned and left, but the echo of his words followed her like a shadow. That night, sleep eluded her. Nova paced the guest room. Her reflection fractured in the tall mirror. She could still see him sitting in the dim light, with his armor stripped away. Vulnerable. Human. Her heart ached with something she refused to name. She had promised herself this was only a job, a means to survival. Yet every day with him blurred that line. Every glance, every word, every wound he tried to hide, drew her deeper into the storm. And she feared she would not survive the pull. The following morning, Noah emerged at breakfast as though nothing had happened. Suit, immaculate expression, unreadable voice, clipped as ever. But Nova noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hand lingered on the cup of coffee longer than usual. Neither spoke of the night before. Yet in the silence, something had shifted, an invisible current threading between them. When he left for meetings, she stared at the closed door long after his chair had disappeared through it. Days passed. The rhythm of work resumed. But beneath it, the memory of that vulnerable moment lingered like a secret melody. Nova found herself watching him differently now, not as an employer, not even as an adversary, but as a man who carried wounds carved too deep for most to see. And Noah, though he said nothing, began to glance at her more often. Brief, fleeting, but charged. Once she caught him watching as she spoke sharply to a delivery clerk, who had addressed her with condescension. There had been the faintest curl of his lips, gone too quickly to name. Another time she had climbed a ladder for a file in the library. When she descended, he was waiting below, eyes flicking upward, in an expression unreadable then away, as though caught by his own betrayal. The air between them grew heavier each day, filled with words neither dared to speak. One evening, as the city glowed beneath twilight, Nova entered his office to deliver documents. She paused in the doorway. Noah was seated at his desk, jacket draped aside, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hands moved over papers with precise control, but the lines of his shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. "You work too much," she murmured. His gaze lifted sharp. "You presume too much." She smiled faintly. "Then fire me." A silence. Then unexpectedly, he said, "I should." Her heart stuttered. "Then why don't you?" His eyes held hers, storm gray and unflinching. "Because every time I consider it, I wonder if the silence you'd leave behind would be worse than the chaos you bring." The words struck like lightning. Nova's breath caught her pulse, roaring in her ears. She wanted to answer, bridge the distance, and confess the storm swelling inside her. But before she could, he returned to his papers, his walls rising again. "Leave the files on the desk," he said coolly. Her hands trembled as she obeyed, setting them down. But as she walked away, her heart whispered the truth neither dared admit. The fractures in his silence were growing, and soon they would break them both. The storm that had lingered for days finally broke into a clear night. The sky above New York stretched in velvet black scattered with pinpricks of starlight. From the penthouse balcony, the city seemed alive with fire, streets glowing, windows, burning bridges, strung like light necklaces across the dark water. Nova leaned against the railing, her silk blouse trembling with the breeze. The evening had stretched long, filled with endless meetings that drained her strength, and she had sought refuge here, where air at least carried the illusion of freedom. Behind her, the door slid open with a low hush. She didn't need to turn. She already knew who it was. Noah White moved into the night air with quiet command, his chair humming softly against the marble floor. He stopped beside her, his gaze directed toward the skyline. For a moment, neither spoke. The city's heartbeat filled the silence between them. "You should be sleeping," he said finally, his voice low, almost careless. "I could say the same about you," Nova replied, her lips curving faintly. His storm-gray eyes shifted to her, unreadable in the dim glow of the city lights. "Sleep is a luxury," he murmured, "not a necessity," spoken like a man who hasn't allowed himself to dream in years. Something flickered across his face, so fleeting she might have imagined it. Nova turned back to the skyline, unwilling to let him see how deeply she studied him when he looked away. "You built all this," she said softly. "The empire, the wealth, the power. But at what cost?" His jaw tightened. "You presume too much again. And you hide too much," she countered gently, always behind that ice armor. His gaze caught hers, then sharp and unyielding. But beneath it, she saw something dangerous, an ache, a longing, a hunger neither dared to name. The air grew heavier, charged with the weight of unsaid words. Noah wheeled closer until the edge of his chair brushed her hip. "Careful, Nova," he said, voice lower now, edged with warning. "Some walls are built for survival. Break them, and you may not like what you find." Her pulse quickened, but she did not retreat. "Then maybe I'd rather face what's real than drown in what's false." For a heartbeat, the world shrank, just the two of them, a city sprawling below, and a silence thick with desire. Later that week, the moment returned in unexpected form. It was late evening when Nova entered the library, her arms full of files Eleanor White had requested. The vast room was shadowed. The chandeliers dimmed only the desk lamp, casting a golden circle across shelves of leather-bound volumes. Noah sat there, sleeves rolled, tie undone, eyes glinting beneath furrowed brows. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man haunted by battles no one else could fight. "You should rest," Nova said softly. He did not look up. "So you've taken it upon yourself to monitor my health now?" Her lips curved. "Someone has to." When he finally raised his gaze, it caught hers with an intensity that stole her breath. For a moment, neither moved. Then his hand reached for a folder too far across the desk. Papers slipped, scattering onto the floor. Nova bent to gather them instinctively. At the same instant, he maneuvered his chair lower, reaching too. Their hands touched. Heat jolted through her veins, sharp, undeniable. She froze her fingers against his, the warmth of his skin stark against the cool perfection he wore like armor. Noah's eyes darkened, his breath shifting. Neither spoke. Neither pulled away. The silence between them thickened, taut as the edge of a blade. Slowly his fingers curled around hers, not commanding, not cold, but almost questioning. Nova's chest rose, fell her heart a storm. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but something more profound, primal and unstoppable held her in place. Her lips parted, words dying unspoken. His gaze dipped for one dangerous instant toward her mouth. The air fractured. And then, a sound. Jonathan Hale's voice echoed faintly from the hall. Mr. White. Noah's hand released hers as if burned. He straightened, coldness snapping back like steel shutters. "Leave the files on the desk," he said flatly. The moment was gone, but its echo lingered in Nova's blood, relentless as fire. That night she lay awake, the city's hum pressing against the windows. She touched her fingers to her lips, as though to memorize the kiss that had never been the one their silence had nearly carved into existence. Her chest ached with confusion. This was madness. He was her employer, her tormentor, the man who held her life in contracts and conditions. And yet, she could not deny the truth. She wanted him, not the billionaire, not the ruthless CEO, but the man who had looked at her with storm-gray eyes, softened by something fragile, raw, and terrifying. The following day, the tension sharpened. Every glance, every brush of proximity crackled with unspoken heat. At breakfast, his hand lingered too long on the coffee cup she handed him. In the corridor, their shoulders brushed and both froze, as though struck by lightning. He did not speak of it, neither did she, but both knew. The line between them had shifted, and once turned, it could not return. That evening, a blackout swept briefly across Manhattan. The penthouse plunged into darkness, broken only by the moon's silver through glass walls. Nova found herself in the hallway, heart pounding, calling out softly, "Noah!" His voice came from the study, steady but faint. "Here." She pushed open the door. Shadows draped across him, the outlines of his chair barely visible. For a moment he looked like a figure carved of night itself, unreachable and alone. Without thinking, she crossed the room and touched his shoulder. "Are you all right?" His head turned. In the moonlight, his eyes glimmered, storm and sorrow tangled together. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "Maybe," she whispered back. "But I am." The silence thickened, swollen with the weight of what they dared not speak. Her hand lingered. His breath shifted, and then so close, she could feel his warm voice broke the night. Nova. Her name in his mouth was not command, not mockery. It was a confession. Her heart thundered. Her lips parted. The distance between them thinned, dangerous, fragile. And in that suspended second where breath met breath, where desire coiled like fire, they hovered on the edge of a kiss that could ruin them both. But before it could break, the lights surged back, flooding the room with brightness. The spell shattered. Noah's chair wheeled back abruptly. His voice clipped and controlled again. You should return to your quarters. Nova stood frozen, her pulse still burning, her lips trembling with the ghost of what had almost been. She wanted to scream, to demand why he kept retreating, why he let her close only to banish her again. But pride chained her tongue. At last she whispered, "Good night, Mr. White," and she left. Yet, as she closed her door, the truth echoed within her. The kiss had not happened, but its absence had changed everything. The city thrummed with the rhythm of wealth and whispers, and for once, Nova wished she could disappear into its noise. The memory of that night still clung to her skin. The blackout, the almost kiss, the heat of Noah's breath, just a breath away from hers. It haunted her, a phantom touch, replaying endlessly in the quiet of her thoughts. But Noah had retreated again. In the days that followed, he became colder, sharper, as though punishing himself for allowing his walls to crack. He buried himself in board meetings, ruthless negotiations, and contracts thick as armor. When it brushed hers, his gaze was fleeting, yet its weight left her trembling. Nova told herself she would endure. She could swallow the storm inside her chest and reduce it to silence. But endurance was a fragile thing, easily fractured. And Sophia Monroe knew precisely where to strike. It began with an invitation. Nova found the envelope on her desk one morning, sleek black, sealed with golden wax. Her name was written in delicate script that dared her to believe she belonged. Inside, White Enterprises, Annual Partnership Summit. Formal attire required. Her stomach tightened. She had learned enough about these gatherings to know they were not simply about commerce. They were battlefields where every handshake carried a price, every glance a calculation. When she brought the invitation to Jonathan Hale, he studied it with an unreadable expression. Mr. White insists you attend as his accompaniment. The pause before the last word told her everything. The summit was held in a glass tower overlooking the East River. The ballroom sparkled beneath chandeliers like captured constellations. Servers glided with champagne, the air humming with conversations about mergers and markets. And then there was Noah, commanding the room even from his chair, his presence magnetic, his storm-gray eyes fixed on those who mattered most. The crowd bent around him, some with reverence, others with envy. Nova walked at his side, her gown of deep sapphire clinging to her like midnight waves. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Who is she? Not his usual companion. A caretaker, perhaps. Or something else. Nova held her chin high, though heat prickled beneath her skin. She told herself she could endure. Those words could not wound unless she let them. And then Sophia appeared. Emerald silk lips painted like blood eyes gleaming with practiced cruelty. She swept across the floor like she owned the air, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Noah, she purred, leaning closer than politeness allowed. It's been far too long. His jaw tightened, but his reply was smooth. Sophia. Her gaze flicked to Nova, then she assessed, dismissed, and dissected everything instantly. And this must be the new arrangement. Nova felt her stomach twist, but her voice emerged steady. Nova Hernandez. Sophia's smile widened, teeth white against red. Charming. I suppose every empire requires staff. The insult hung in the air, delicate yet poisonous. Several nearby guests glanced toward them, their curiosity sharpened. Before Nova could respond, Noah's voice cut through, cold and commanding. She's not staff. Sophia's brows lifted. No. Then what is she? For a breathless moment, silence pressed in. Noah's gaze lingered on Nova, his storm-gray eyes unreadable, as though searching for the answer himself. Finally he said evenly, She belongs here, more than most. The crowd stirred whispers like smoke. Sophia's smile faltered for only a fraction of a second, Before she recovered, her laughter spilling like poisoned honey. "How gallant," she murmured. "But we both know Noah belonging is not granted by words. It's earned and/or inherited." Her gaze flicked to Nova, dripping disdain. "And some things cannot be faked." With that, she glided away, leaving silence in her wake. Nova's hands trembled at her sides, though she clenched them into fists. She wanted to scream, strike back, and shatter the smile off Sophia's face. But she could not in this glittering hall of vipers. Noah must have sensed her turmoil. His chair moved closer, his voice low. "Ignore her." Her throat tightened. "Easy for you to say. You don't carry her words like knives." His eyes caught hers sharp. "Do you think I don't?" Sophia knows where to cut deepest. That's her gift. And her curse. Nova swallowed hard, forcing her shoulders back. Then it's time someone showed her she doesn't own every blade. Noah's lips twitched for a fleeting moment, as if the ghost of a smile dared surface. Later, as speeches echoed across the hall and champagne flowed, Sophia struck again. Nova had stepped aside near the gallery, seeking a moment of air. Sophia appeared at her shoulder, her perfume cloying, her voice silk over steel. "You think you're different, don't you?" she whispered. "That you've cracked his armor. That you matter." Nova turned, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Maybe I don't matter to you." But to him, Sophia's laugh sliced through. "To him, you're a distraction, nothing more. He will never love you the way he loved me. He doesn't have the pieces left." The words landed like blows, heavy, brutal. Nova's chest constricted, but she refused to let Sophia see the wound. So she smiled, sharp, dangerous. "Then maybe you should be more afraid. Because sometimes distractions rewrite the whole game." For the first time, Sophia's composure cracked. A flicker of fury quickly smoothed. But Nova had seen it. The night wore on, and when it ended, the city's chill clung to Nova as they returned to the limousine. She sat in silence, the echo of Sophia's words, gnawing at her resolve. Finally, she spoke. "She's right, isn't she? You'll never see me like you saw her." Noah's head turned sharply, his eyes storming. "Is that what you believe?" Her throat tightened. "What else am I supposed to believe? Every time we get close, you retreat. Every time I think I see you, you shut me out." The air between them burned fragile and fierce. Noah leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. "Sophia is the past, a ghost I should have buried long ago. Please do not mistake my walls for chains to her. They are mine. And if I retreat—" His gaze locked with hers, raw and unflinching. "It's because I am afraid of what happens if I don't." Her breath caught her pulse roaring. Before she could answer, the car slowed before the penthouse. The moment broke, but the truth remained heavy as thunder. Noah White was afraid. And for the first time, Nova realized so was she. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, Sophia's venom swirling with Noah's confession. Fear and desire battled in her chest, tearing her in two. But beneath it all, one truth whispered louder. This was no longer a game she could endure from a distance. The storm had pulled her in, and there was no turning back. The storm did not strike suddenly. It crept silent, patient, calculated. Nova felt it the days after the summit, a subtle tightening of the air around her, whispers in corridors where none had been before. Lingering glances from employees, sharpened with something cruel. Files that she knew she had arranged were misplaced. A phone left ringing just beyond her reach, only for Jonathan Hale to collect it with a frown deeper than usual. It was as though invisible threads were being pulled one by one, weaving a net around her. And at the center of those threads, she knew stood Sophia Monroe. The revelation came during a board meeting. Nova had been tasked with bringing in documents, routine, simple. Yet when she opened the folder before a room filled with investors, The papers inside were not what she had prepared. Instead, they bore numbers, altered figures, twisted projections, ruined. Murmurs rippled across the polished table. Accusations bloomed in narrowed eyes. One investor leaned forward, his tone cutting. "Are these your figures, Miss Hernandez?" Nova's chest constricted. "No. These aren't someone's tampered laughter, faint but sharp spilled from the end of the table." As a guest of one of the investors, Sophia Monroe tilted her head. Curious. "I suppose mistakes happen, though some are rather costly." The implication struck like a blade. Nova's hands trembled as she clutched the folder. "This wasn't my mistake. I checked." But the eyes around her were not kind. They had already chosen suspicion. And then Noah's voice cut through low and unyielding. "Enough." The room fell silent. He sat at the head of the table, storm-gray gaze fixed not on Nova, but on the investors. "If there is fault, it is mine. I signed off on these numbers. You will take your grievances to me, not my staff." The weight of his authority pressed into the air until no one dared reply. Slowly the meeting resumed, though tension lingered like smoke. Nova stood rigid, her breath shallow. Relief and confusion tangled inside her relief that he had shielded her confusion, that he had done so publicly, risking whispers against his control. But when the meeting ended and the room emptied, Noah's gaze turned on her. And it was not kind. "Carelessness will not be tolerated," he said coldly. Her throat tightened. "I wasn't careless." "Someone excuses or noise," he interrupted. "Silence them, or they will bury you." His words cut sharper than Sophia's. And yet beneath them, she thought she heard something else. Not dismissal, not cruelty, but a warning, as though he too knew the trap tightening around her. That evening, Nova found herself alone in the penthouse library. She stared at the fire crackling in the marble hearth, the weight of the day pressing against her bones. She wanted to scream to demand why he always retreated into cruelty after showing her care. But the fire swallowed her words, leaving only silence. Footsteps approached, soft, deliberate. "Noah," she murmured without turning. He stopped behind her, the hum of his chair low against the hush. For a moment neither spoke. Then his voice came quieter than she had ever heard. "You should not have been put in that position." Her eyes closed, breath catching. "But you let them think it was my fault." A pause. "Would you rather I tell them it was Sophia's?" The name dropped like ice. Nova turned sharply, her eyes locking with his. So it was her. His gaze did not waver. "She thrives on chaos. She wants you gone." Nova's heart pounded, a storm of anger and fear colliding. Then why let her win? Why not expose her? His jaw tightened. "Because battles must be chosen, and this one." He exhaled sharply. This one would destroy more than her. The weight in his tone silenced her. But beneath her frustration, a deeper ache grew. He was protecting her, even if his method carved wounds. And she realized with terrifying clarity that the storm between them was no longer hers alone. The trap tightened days later at a charity gala hosted by White Enterprises. Nova had been reluctant to attend after the last ordeal, but Eleanor White insisted. "Appearances matter," the matriarch said coolly. "And if you intend to remain by my son's side, you will endure them." The ballroom glistened with gold and crystal laughter, bubbling against the clink of champagne glasses. Yet beneath the glamour, Nova sensed the danger lurking. Eyes followed her more boldly now, whispers sharper. Then came Sophia. She approached with a smile sharpened to perfection, her arm entwined with a foreign investor. "Nova Hernandez," she said sweetly, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "How bold of you to attend after that unfortunate mishap at the board meeting." Nova stiffened. I have nothing to be ashamed of. Oh, of course not, Sophia purred, though I do wonder how long Mr. White will tolerate such distractions. Gasps rippled faintly through the circle that had gathered. Faces turned hungry for scandal. Before Nova could reply, Noah's voice cut through. She is no distraction. The crowd hushed. Noah wheeled forward, his presence commanding his gaze, sweeping the guests before fixing on Sophia. Miss Hernandez is integral to this company. To me. Question her and you question me. The silence that followed was thunderous. Sophia's smile faltered a crack, marring her polished facade. For the first time, fury glinted in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, tilting her head with false sweetness. Then, it is you I should be questioning, Noah. Noah's expression did not change, but his words were ice. Try, and you will find I am not the man you left behind. Gasps scattered again, sharper this time. Sophia's composure wavered, and with a brittle smile she retreated. Nova stood frozen, her heart a storm. His defense had been absolute, undeniable, and for the first time he had said it before the world she mattered. But with that declaration came danger. The whispers would not fade. They would sharpen, multiply, and hunt. And Sophia would not forgive humiliation so easily. Back in the limousine, silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Finally, Nova spoke, her voice trembling. Why did you do that? His storm-gray eyes turned to hers, raw and unflinching. Because I will not watch them devour you. Her chest constricted. Even if it ruins you. He leaned closer, his voice low, a confession cloaked in steel. Especially then. The air between them tightened, charged with the weight of words unsaid. For a heartbeat, Nova thought he might close the distance, that the almost kiss would finally break. But instead he turned away, his jaw clenched. Go inside, he said roughly when they arrived at the penthouse. Nova obeyed, though her heart screamed to stay. And as she closed her door that night, she realized the truth. Sophia's trap had failed, but the war had only begun. The city glittered that night as if mocking the storm unraveling in silence. Nova sat by the tall windows of her guest room, gazing down at the river, where lights shimmered like fragments of broken stars. Since the gala whispers had multiplied, subtle, poisonous. Strangers in corridors paused mid-conversation when she passed. Emails vanishing from her desk. Invitations arriving late or not at all. She had expected Sophia's wrath. But this was different. Too precise. Too calculated. Someone else was moving in the shadows. The answer revealed itself in the most fragile of places, trust. Jonathan Hale summoned her to the office late one evening. His voice was curt, but beneath it Nova detected unease. Miss Hernandez, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. These documents were intercepted before they reached the press. Nova opened it and froze. Photographs. She left the penthouse late at night. She conversed with rival executives during brief encounters arranged innocently at previous events. Cropped images designed to paint a story of betrayal. Alongside them, fabricated emails suggested she had been feeding information to competitors. Her breath caught. This is all false. Hale's eyes softened, though his tone remained formal. Of course. But perception often matters more than truth. And Sophia Monroe knows this game better than most. Nova's fingers trembled as she closed the folder. She's working with them, isn't she? With Noah's rivals. Hale hesitated. Then slowly, yes. The word struck like iron. When Noah learned, the storm broke. His fury was not loud. It was colder, sharper, more terrifying. He sat at the head of his private office, the city's night sprawling behind him, like a conquered kingdom, the damning folder on the desk before him. Do you think me blind? he asked, his storm-gray eyes fixed on Nova. Her chest tightened. No. But you must know I would never. Must I? His tone was silk over steel. Tell me, Nova, how do I distinguish truth from deception when every photograph, every forged word is designed to bleed me from the inside out? Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze. Because you know me. Because you see me. And if you doubt, that perhaps you've doubted from the beginning. The words hung between them, sharp and trembling. For the first time, his composure faltered. His eyes flickered, shadowed with something raw. I want to believe you, he said softly, almost to himself. God help me, I do. Her breath caught. Then, believe me. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of 1,000 unsaid truths. Finally, Noah closed the folder with a snap. I will bury this, he said flatly. Sophia will not win. Not here. Not now. But even as he spoke, Nova saw it, the fracture in his armor, the fear that her presence had become both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. Days passed, in tense silence. White Enterprises moved like a fortress under siege. Every department scrutinized every rival circling for blood. And through it all, Nova felt the invisible walls closing around her. Sophia struck again, this time more brazen. At a conference luncheon, she appeared at Nova's side, her laughter low enough for only them to hear. How does it feel? Sophia whispered, to be the crack in his empire. To know that every eye watching him wonders when you'll shatter it completely. Nova clenched her fists. You won't break me. Sophia's smile curved cruel. I don't need to break you. I need to make him believe you're already hurt. With that, she drifted away, her perfume lingering like poison. Nova's breath shook, but her resolve hardened. If Sophia wanted war, then she would not cower. The breaking point came weeks later. Nova left the office late, exhaustion pressing into her bones. The city's streets were quieter shadows stretching long beneath street lamps. She had nearly reached the penthouse entrance when a black car pulled sharply to the curb. Hands. Rough, sudden. A cloth pressed to her mouth. The world spun, darkness swallowing her whole. When Nova woke, the air was damp and metallic. A warehouse abandoned, silent but for the echo of dripping water. Her wrists were bound, her heart hammering against the ropes. Sophia stepped from the shadows, her emerald gown replaced by sleek black, her beauty sharper, more dangerous in the harsh light. You should have left when you had the chance, Sophia said softly, circling like a predator. But you stayed, and now you'll pay. Nova's throat tightened. What do you want from me? Sophia's smile was cold. Nothing. You are nothing. But sometimes, nothing can destroy everything. Before Nova could reply, footsteps thundered outside. The door crashed open. Noah entered. His chair glided like a weapon, his presence filling the cavernous space with power. Behind him, men in black moved swiftly, ruthlessly, neutralizing Sophia's hired guards. Sophia's composure cracked for the first time. Noah. But his gaze was not for her. It was fixed on Nova's storm-gray eyes, blazing with something fierce, something unrestrained. Untie her, he ordered. His men obeyed instantly, ropes falling from Nova's wrists. She stumbled forward, breathless, trembling, and found herself caught in the steady grip of his hand. You came, she whispered, tears burning her eyes. His gaze held hers, raw and unflinching. Always. The word was low, dangerous, more confession than promise. Sophia's voice trembled with fury. You'll ruin yourself for her, Noah. Everything you've built. He turned then, his expression colder than ice. Better ruined with her than intact with you. The finality in his tone silenced her. His men dragged Sophia away, her protests echoing into the night. And in the heavy silence that followed, Noah's hand remained on Nova's, steady and unyielding. Back in the safety of the penthouse, Nova sat by the fire, her wrists still raw from the ropes. Noah remained nearby, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that burned. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Why do you keep saving me, only to push me away?" For once, he did not retreat, because the walls had cracked, the storm had broken. And Noah, white, ruthless billionaire, whispered the truth that had haunted him since the beginning. "Because losing you terrifies me more than anything else." The words struck like lightning, searing, undeniable. Nova's heart thundered, tears spilling freely now. And though no kiss bridged the space between them that night, the truth had been spoken. A truth that could no longer be buried in silence. The morning after the warehouse ordeal, the penthouse was silent. Too silent. Nova sat in the library, her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup of tea she barely tasted. The fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth could not reach the chill pressed into her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the coarse rope at her wrists, the echo of Sophia's laughter in the shadows. And yet, beneath the fear, something else pulsed, the memory of Noah's voice, sharp as thunder. Always. The word had branded itself into her, fierce and unyielding. For the first time, she believed it. He had come for her, not as an employer or a reluctant savior, but as a man who could not bear to lose her. But belief was fragile, and she knew their world would not let it stand unchallenged. The challenge came sooner than expected. Eleanor White arrived at the penthouse without warning. She swept into the marble foyer in a gown of ivory silk, her silver hair coiled with regal precision, her eyes gleaming like polished steel. Servants bowed as she passed, though her gaze fixed only on one target, Nova. "Leave us," Eleanor commanded. The staff melted away. Nova rose to her feet, pulse quickening. "Mrs. White." The matriarch's lips curved, though the smile did not touch her eyes. "Miss Hernandez. Or should I call you the storm in my son's empire?" Nova's throat tightened. "I never asked to be—" "No," Eleanor interrupted smoothly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of privilege. "Storms never ask. They destroy." Before Nova could reply, the hum of wheels announced Noah's arrival. He entered his presence, slicing through the tension like a blade. His gaze flicked briefly to Nova, steady grounding, before turning to his mother. "Eleanor." His tone was clipped. "You have no right to be here unannounced." Her brows arched, sharp as daggers. "I am your mother. My right is carved in your blood." Noah's jaw tightened. "Blood does not grant permission to trample the woman I protect." Nova's breath caught. The words rang louder than the crackle of the fire. Eleanor's expression hardened, though her composure did not falter. "So it is true," she murmured. "You've let yourself be ensnared by her." "She is not an ensnarement." Noah snapped, his storm-gray eyes blazing. "She is the only reason I still fight." The declaration silenced the room. Nova's chest tightened, tears pricking her eyes. He had never said it aloud, not even to her. And now he spoke it before his mother, before the empire itself. Eleanor's voice cut sharply again. "And what of the company? The legacy? Do you mean to gamble it all for her?" "Yes," Noah said. The word fell like an earthquake. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, fury glinting beneath their cool surface. "You would betray the dynasty your father built. You would risk the collapse of White Enterprises for a distraction. She is not a distraction." His voice cracked rawer than Nova had ever heard. "I sat in this chair for years, buried beneath steel and silence, ready to let it all rot. She is the only reason I breathe. The empire means nothing without her. The confession was brutal in its honesty. Nova stood frozen, torn between awe and fear. She wanted to speak to temper the fire, but her voice was locked in her throat. Eleanor turned her gaze to Nova, then sharp and unyielding. "And you? Do you intend to let him destroy himself for you?" Nova swallowed hard. "I never asked him to, but you let him." Eleanor pressed her tone cold. "You let him fall." "No," Nova said, her voice steady now. "I don't let him fall. I keep him standing when the world would rather see him broken." The words startled even herself, but they were true. Every moment, every battle, every wound they shared, she had refused to let him collapse beneath it. For the first time, Eleanor's composure wavered. A flicker of surprise quickly masked. Noah wheeled forward, his presence commanding. "This conversation is over. If you wish to preserve the empire, you will learn to accept the woman who preserves me." Eleanor stared at him, her silence heavier than any scream. Finally, she turned sharply, her gown sweeping like a blade as she left the penthouse without another word. The door closed, and the silence left behind was deafening. Nova stood trembling, her breath shallow. "Noah, you didn't have to." He turned to her storm-gray eyes, raw, unguarded. "Yes, I did." Her lips parted, but no words came. He wheeled closer, stopping just before her. His hand reached out, not commanding, not cold, but trembling slightly as it brushed her wrist. For years, he whispered, I believed strength meant silence. That love was a weakness I could not afford. But you, his voice cracked. You've made me weak, Nova, and I've never been stronger. Her heart shattered, rebuilt, and caught fire all at once. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them, her hand covering his. You're not weak, she said softly. You're finally alive. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no empire dynasty or rival waiting in the shadows. Only them, fragile and fierce, bound by something no threat could sever. Noah's gaze dipped, his breath brushing her cheek. The distance between them thinned, dangerous, electric. And this time no interruptions came. His lips met hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was fire, years of silence breaking walls, collapsing storms colliding. His hand cupped her jaw, hers tangled in his shirt, clinging like the world might rip them apart if they let go. When they finally broke, breathless, his forehead rested against hers. I won't hide anymore, he whispered. Nova's tears spilled freely, now falling onto his hand. Then neither will I. That night, the penthouse felt transformed. It felt alive. No longer a fortress of glass and marble, like a sanctuary carved from defiance. The fire burned brighter, the shadows less suffocating. For the first time, Nova allowed herself to believe in a future that was not chained by fear. But deep in the silence of her chest, she knew the war was not over. Eleanor White had retreated, but she had not surrendered, and Sophia Monroe still lingered, her venom waiting. The empire would not allow this love to stand unchallenged. But for now, Noah and Nova stood together, not as employer and caretaker, not as billionaire and distraction, but as two souls who had chosen each other against the world. And that choice burned brighter than any empire. The world outside had begun to thaw. Weeks passed since the confrontation with Eleanor White, and though the matriarch had not openly embraced Nova, the air in the empire shifted. Whispers still lingered. Rivals still circled, but something fundamental had changed. Noah no longer hid. He held Nova's hand at public functions. He spoke her name in boardrooms without hesitation. The investors, once skeptical, began to recognize the unshakable truth. This woman who had walked into the empire as an outsider had become the axis around which Noah's strength revolved. However, for Nova, the most significant storm was not outside. It was within. She discovered it one quiet morning. The penthouse was still sunlight, spilling golden across marble floors. Nova sat in the bathroom, the small white test trembling in her hands. Her breath caught as two faint lines appeared, sealing her fate in delicate strokes of pink. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, fierce and terrifying. 1,000 thoughts collided her grandfather's smile, her dreams of independence, Noah's storm-gray eyes. The empire that would never accept her now faced with something even more unshakable, the future written inside her. Her hands trembled, but she smiled through the tears. For the first time in her life, the future was not a shadow. It was a spark. When she told Noah, silence engulfed the room. He sat across from her, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, eyes fixed on hers, with an intensity that pinned her in place. "Repeat it," he whispered. Nova's throat tightened. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, he was marble still unreadable, carved in shadow. Then slowly his expression cracked. His storm-gray eyes burned. His lips parted as though he had forgotten how to breathe. "Mine." His voice was rough, broken. Nova almost laughed through her tears. Who else could it be? Something shifted in him then, raw and unguarded. He reached for her, his hand trembling as it pressed against her stomach. "I never thought," his voice faltered. "I never thought I'd have the chance to build something beyond steel and contracts." Nova covered his hand with hers, her voice steady. "Then we'll build it together." He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against her stomach, as though it were the altar of his salvation. And for the first time, Noah White wept. But joy was never left untouched by shadow. When Eleanor White learned the truth, her composure cracked for the briefest moment. Shock, disbelief, and even fear flashed in her silver gaze. But then came the silence, the same she wielded as a weapon. "You've sealed your fate," she told Noah coldly. "The board will not forgive this. The dynasty will not forgive this." Noah's reply was calm, resolute. "Then let them burn." Yet beneath his defiance, Nova saw the cost. Every battle with his mother carved new lines into his face, deeper shadows into his gaze. And Sophia, though absent from sight, lingered like a storm on the horizon. Rumors of her alliance with rival corporations spread through hushed whispers. Even without her presence, her shadow poisoned the air. Nova knew the war was not over, but she also knew this: she and Noah would not fight it alone. One evening, weeks later, they stood together on the penthouse balcony. The city sprawled like a living galaxy beneath them. Noah's arm brushed hers, his hand seeking hers without words. "When I first met you," he murmured, "I thought you were just another storm to test me. But you weren't. You were the calm I never knew I craved, and the fire I never knew I needed." Nova turned, her eyes glistening. "And you were the wall I thought I'd never break. But I was wrong. You weren't a wall, Noah. You were a fortress protecting a man who deserved to be loved." He kissed her, then not with desperation, but with reverence. A kiss that sealed not just passion, but promise. The world could rage, dynasties could crumble, rivals could strike. But in that moment they were untouchable. Months passed. The empire did not collapse. Investors learned to adapt. Eleanor's resistance softened, not into warmth, but into wary tolerance. The sight of her son standing straighter, his will sharpened, his eyes alive again, forced her to reconsider the legacy she wished to preserve. And Sophia Monroe, She vanished into the silence she once commanded. Whether she plotted in shadows or surrendered in secret, no one knew. But her absence spoke louder than her presence ever had. Nova brought new life into the world on a spring morning, in a hospital suite bathed in soft light. Noah was there, storm-gray eyes burning, as he held their child for the first time. A tiny girl with curls, dark as night, and skin kissed by sun and snow. "She's perfect," Nova whispered through tears. Noah's voice cracked. "She's ours." And in that moment, every shadow, every storm, every battle faded. What remained was simple, unshakable. Family. The story of Noah White and Nova Hernandez was not one of perfection. It was forged in scars tempered by betrayal carved through fire. But it was love. Fierce, flawed, undeniable. And as the city below roared with its endless hunger high above it all, a billionaire. And the woman who defied his world held their daughter unafraid. Because they had survived the storm. Because they had chosen each other. Because love against empire, against dynasty, against shadow had won. And if you followed Noah and Nova's journey this far, let me ask you, what would you sacrifice? What empire would you defy for the person who makes you feel alive? If this story has moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss the story of love, betrayal, and redemption waiting just beyond the horizon.